I'm Meredith Cass. I'm founder and CEO of Nix. And in the context of human performance, our initial application is trying to help athletes in particular, but also tactical athletes in the context of military members, but also laborers in helping to manage their hydration status in the field and in real time. So the challenge that these groups are facing right now is that they're compromising, without their knowledge, compromising safety and performance because of this involuntary dehydration that's occurring. And what that basically means is, with the current methods of managing hydration, we're essentially talking about using thirst or a perceived sweat rate as an indicator of how much somebody should be drinking, how many fluids someone should be drinking. And candidly, it's only accurate to about 50%. So it basically amounts to guessing. And we see in these four categories, we see huge issues, especially at the severe end of the dehydration spectrum, which can often lead to heat illness or heat injury. In very severe cases can lead to death, of course. But as a company, we are much more interested in helping to identify and prevent even moderate and mild cases of dehydration. So just a little bit of quick background of how we think about hydration. The convention is to think about it as a percentage, which represents the percentage of your body mass that has been lost in fluids. So if you're a 150-pound person, you lose 1.5 pounds of water, you are considered 1% dehydrated. And that can actually occur in as little as 14 minutes. That's for somebody that's a heavier sweater, but certainly the risk is pretty high. For somebody that's obviously a lighter sweater, that might take a little bit longer, but just to orient you to this scale, we generally regard plus or minus 1% as well hydrated. Beyond that, in the sort of negative direction in terms of body mass lost, mild is kind of this 1 to 4% range, and so on to moderate and severe, 4 to 7%, 7 to 10%. Death occurs somewhere between 10 and 15%, and that really depends on the person. Oftentimes, at that point, you've got some hyperthermia issues or heat illness issues related as well. But it's always also worth mentioning the concept of overhydration, which more accurately is called hyponatremia. So when an individual is losing sweat, which of course has electrolytes in it, but is only consuming water to replace those fluids, there becomes potential for a really critical imbalance of sodium in the blood. And what that ends up messing with is the sodium-potassium channels in the cells, which can start to attack the vital organs even sooner than it would in the case of dehydration. So death actually occurs from overhydration or hyponatremia when you're talking about a 6 to 8% increase in body mass. It's far more rare, of course, than dehydration, but potentially far more serious. So how often are we even talking about this occurring? So in the same dehydration convention, this is a true field study. I happen to be on a marathon course with runners that 60% of the time athletes finished outside this plus or minus 1% range in terms of proper hydration. So these are athletes that obviously were drinking ad libitum, drinking to thirst throughout their event, and 60% of them were incurring some sort of consequences, which I'll quantify for you in a moment, as a result of their involuntary dehydration. So physiologically, many of you probably know this, but just diving a little deeper into what's happening when somebody dehydrates. So obviously you're losing fluids through some method. In this case, we're talking about active dehydration, so losing fluids through sweat predominantly. Where that water comes from at a very sort of simplified level, most acutely, is it's coming from the blood volume. So similar to if that individual had incurred a traumatic injury, experienced some acute blood loss, these individuals are experiencing hypovolemia in a very similar way. So that kicks off a few sort of compensatory sort of issues within the body. The first one being an increased heart rate. So if you've got less blood flowing through your body, and you definitely have a lower blood pressure at that point, your heart rate is going to increase to try to continue to circulate the blood to those vital organs. your respiratory rate is going to increase because the primary sort of critical element that the blood is delivering to your body, especially when you're doing physical activity, is oxygen. So to compensate for a lower blood volume, the respiratory rate increases. In an effort to keep the blood going to the vital organs, the lungs, the heart, the brain, it starts to reduce the blood flow to slightly less critical areas of the body. And that can include fingers and toes, it can include arms, it almost certainly includes the skin, which is particularly concerning because that heat transfer through the skin is one of the primary methods of thermoregulation, including sweat, which can also stop if somebody is severely dehydrated. You get a decreased blood flow to the muscles in addition to the skin and other areas, which obviously manifests in other discomfort, including muscle fatigue and sometimes painful cramps. And then potentially less sort of critical and severe, but certainly uncomfortable, is sometimes GI symptoms from a decreased blood flow to the GI tract. And many of you know that to do any sort of absorption of nutrients, but also including fluids like water, you've got to have blood flow flowing into the gut. So if that is compromised, you're actually going to have a harder time rehydrating orally. So some athletes may experience that as sloshing in their stomach because that fluid is not being absorbed as efficiently. So all of this ends up culminating in a sort of cardiorespiratory stress, increased risk of thermoregulation, muscle fatigue, and sometimes muscle pain or muscle cramps. If it's a more severe case, you can have nausea and vomiting, but otherwise just some more mild GI distress and malabsorption. But all of it really results in this incredible impairment to that individual's performance. So how do we quantify that? These studies have done exactly that. So on the endurance performance impairment, now in this scenario, I'm not just talking about, full marathons. I'm talking about football players, soccer players running down the length of a field. They're doing so 29% slower when they're in this mild dehydration range, which remember is that 1 to 3% range. That performance actually drops off even more precipitously from there. So in that moderate dehydration range, you're now talking performance impairments potentially in the 50% range. On the cognitive side, those impairments look like impaired decision-making, impaired judgment, delayed reaction times, up to 20% in the mild end of the range. Which you can imagine is bad enough as an athlete if you're swinging at a pitch or something like that. But if you're a soldier, a firefighter, or stock car driver, that cognitive impairment becomes a safety risk very, very quickly. The kicker, of course, is that all of this is completely preventable when those individuals know what their fluid needs are. Right? If you know what fluid out looks like, then you know what fluid in should look like. And you have the opportunity to keep yourself in that plus or minus 1% range. And so that's where Nix comes in. We set out to build a product that could do exactly that for individuals. So it is a sweat-based product that tells individuals exactly this when, what, and how much to drink. So it's providing cumulative information about fluid losses, electrolyte losses, sweat rate, current hydration status, but also core body temperature. So it's sort of a complete package around dehydration and hyperthermia management and prevention. How we do that, I will stop short of giving you our exact algorithms, but what we're doing is we're taking sweat off the surface of the body, usually the dorsal or the ventral side of the forearm, but also working on algorithms on the abdomen, where we're taking a few very specific raw data points and then using our proprietary algorithms to extrapolate those into what's happening over the surface area of the entire body. So if we understand the sweat rate and the electrolyte content of the sweat, let's say on the dorsal side of the forearm, we actually have the algorithms that can extrapolate that to the entire body to start to understand what does the full body sweat rate look like, what does the full body electrolyte loss rate look like. And we do similarly with skin temperature extrapolating to core body temperature. We find that pretty exciting because not only during the activity can we support that individual, again, whether it's a marathoner, a football player, a soldier, a firefighter, we can tell that individual what their needs are in real time so that they can start to understand if they're getting into a danger zone, either self-monitoring or somebody monitoring them remotely. And so we have, I won't dive into all the depth of the metrics on this slide, but the idea of being able to provide information across all these metrics to somebody in real time, including perhaps making a product recommendation for rehydration, for oral rehydration, and maybe even identifying the percentage of performance impairment that's being incurred, is pretty powerful. But of course, we're transferring all that data from the patch to an app via Bluetooth or a smartphone or a tablet, whatever smart device of the user's choosing. So that post activity, you can start to use all of that raw data in a much more meaningful way, in a more a deeper analytical process. Especially as you start to look at one individual's historical data across multiple workouts in multiple environments in terms of heat, humidity, direct sun versus cloud cover, but also percent effort makes a huge difference in sweat rate, what gear or clothing somebody is wearing. And it's never the same from one day to the next. So any athletes out there, you obviously know that one individual is going to sweat very differently from, another. But you probably also noticed that you're going to sweat very differently on one day versus another based on all of these myriad factors. So our platform gathers all that information across multiple uses and starts to pile that into our predictive model, which I'm particularly excited about because it starts to understand how to predict for each individual person, not a generalization of people that happen to be your age and gender, but for you specifically to understand on a given day with given environmental conditions, what are your fluid and electrolyte needs going to be? So perfect example, I'm a 9-time marathoner. I ran my 9th marathon in Berlin last year, but I trained in Boston, where I'm from, where it was at least 80 degrees and 80% humidity most days. I arrive in Berlin, it's like 55 degrees and 50% humidity. My fluid needs are completely different. And to be able to have that information is really incredibly valuable so that you're not re-guessing on that brand new day. Now imagine how you extrapolate that to the soldier's need or the firefighter's needs, where one of our pilot clients, for example, is in manufacturing. So on a given day and given conditions, they can start to put together the team that's going to be most productive or most safe in those particular conditions. And here's the part that I'm most excited about. We're doing that with 83% accuracy. Now, that may not sound very high if you're from the healthcare world or building a medical device or a medical diagnostic, where you're probably shooting for 95% or greater. But for a consumer device in the short term, we are really, really pleased with this. I mentioned earlier, drinking ad libitum or drinking to thirst puts people in an accuracy range of just about 50%. We're at 83%. So we are, in comparison to or contrast to the current method of hydration management, we're kind of blowing it out of the water. Maybe more important is the graph on the right-hand side here, which is to say, given our error profile on our very worst day, on the day that our algorithms performed the worst, how bad was it? Was anybody ever in danger, either in the positive or negative direction in terms of dehydration or overhydration? And we're really happy to see that, again, on these worst days, minus 0.7 and plus 63, still falls within that plus or minus 1% of body mass. So if somebody had followed our sensors sort of prescription, if you will, of rehydration to the letter, they would have stayed within that sort of generally accepted range of well hydrated. So we're really excited about that kind of traction. I won't go into too much depth about how we're thinking about the market, because obviously this is really more about sort of performance and why athletes of different types even care about this. But I think it's worth noticing when we're talking about human performance, I'm sure this has come up a few times today, we're talking not just about athletes. We're talking about, there's a reason why we always refer to the military as tactical athletes, because whether you're, again, a runner, a football player, a soldier, whomever, this is a universal fundamental need for hydration, and the physiology does not change. We do have elder care in our sites, partly because hydration management and electrolyte balance management challenges with that in the elder care population is one of the top 3 reasons for hospitalization. And it can also manifest in different ways. It can look like a stroke. It can look like cognitive impairment. It can look like heart disease. So it is something that's really problematic in the elder care market. We do have a small R&D step to address that market, but it's very much on our pathway. I only have a few minutes left, so I won't go into this in detail, but part of what was really important to us is this focus on the every athlete. We are not an elite athlete product, so we need to be priced and packaged in a way that's really accessible for the amateur athlete as well. This one's specific to the endurance market where we intend to start, with probably the most important number on this page being that we're looking at a 94% product margin for our refill pack, which is something that was very much by design and took us a while to get to that metric. We do see revenue paths in a few different directions, but first and foremost, I personally feel really strongly that a SaaS model for a consumer starts to be a bit much. We're all paying at least $10 a month now for Spotify and Netflix and Hulu and God knows how many other software subscriptions that we've got piling up. But we really wanted, it was so important that, psychologically we have people position our product in this sort of essential kit. For a runner, it's their essential race day kit or their essential long run kit, where they're already using consumable products like goo and KT tape and things like that. We wanted to be in that same category. We want to be the product that no endurance athlete goes for a long run without. And we felt pretty strongly that trying to do that through some freemium model on the app just wasn't going to get us there. It's something Strava has always struggled with and continues to, is how to get people from the free version up to the premium version. So for us, we were like, forget it. Let's just do a low cost, high margin disposable, like a razor blade or, testing strips for a diabetic. That's going to be our model, and that's where we're going to make our money. Just a couple minutes left, so I'm definitely not going to spend it talking about, some of the traction. Really, it's the technology that we're excited about, and this is probably the slide that is most meaningful. So we've got 30 pilots in our pipeline, largely on hold during COVID, unfortunately, but we did get a few of these under our belt before COVID hit. For example, the Olympic trials marathon was at the very end of February in Atlanta. We had some athletes competing there. We've got 2 Tokyo 2021 athletes now that are training with our sensors. We've got a big activation that was planned for the Boston Marathon, but we're just kicking that down the line for 2021, as well as Ironman Kona, which is postponed till February. So endurance, again, really being a key part of our focus, largely driven by market dynamics and things like that. It's an easy segment to overlook because it's not as sexy as the NFL or the NBA, but we forget in this country that those athletes, while they don't enjoy the same fame as LeBron James and Tom Brady, there are 60 million of them in the US, which is more than the diabetes market in the US. It's more than all cancers combined. And it's a very sort of rabid, routine, and affluent group that comprises a pretty significant market. So we're excited to keep pushing these pilots forward as COVID is lifted. But in the meantime, we've got more product development on the way. So we're a small team. I won't introduce each individual person. We've got 4 folks on the full-time team with a few key contractors and part-timers. And we make sure that we surround our tiny team with experts in a whole bunch of different areas, ranging from, physiology and the expertise of dehydration, race logistics. Dave McGillivray has been the race director for the Boston Marathon for 33 years or so. Digital marketing, consumer marketing, product development, and these experts are near and dear to us and been really valuable. And perhaps equally so with our sports advisory board. So most recently just added Maria Sharapova that we're really excited about, but really the intent here, these are not product endorsers. These are genuine business advisors who are giving us direction within their area of expertise, within their sport, on product development, product strategy, opening doors for pilots and things like that. And so this is a really key group for us. And that's it. I know we don't have time for Q&A, but I'm leaving my email address up here. I welcome you to reach out to me. Would love to chat with you about our technology, ways that we might work together. And thanks so much for having me.